I wasn't supposed to be there that morning. Let me be clear about that first, because people always ask later, how did you know to go? And the honest answer is that I didn't. I was killing time outside St. James's Palace with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes before I thought to drink it, waiting for a friend who, very typically, had texted me 5 minutes away from approximately the other side of London. It was one of those October mornings that can't decide what it wants to be. Gray but not raining. Cold but not biting. The kind of weather that sits on your shoulders without doing anything dramatic about it. The tourists were already out, they're always out, aren't they, clustered near the railings, phones raised like offerings. A man in a fluorescent orange cagoule was explaining something to his teenage son, pointing at the building with the authority of someone who had read 3 paragraphs about it on Wikipedia. A Japanese couple consulted a paper map. An actual paper map. I remember thinking, I haven't seen one of those in years. Normal. Ordinary. Just another Thursday. I checked my phone. Nothing from my friend. I stuffed it back in my pocket and looked up at the palace, really looked at it, the way you stop doing when you live in London, when famous buildings become part of the furniture of a city you stop seeing. The stonework. The flags. The stillness of the guards who are somehow not statues. And then, the man standing next to me, balding, maybe 60, a lanyard around his neck from some conference I couldn't read, said quietly, almost to himself, something's happening today. I glanced at him. Sorry? He didn't look at me. He was watching the palace entrance. The last 3 cars that went through, he said. All private plates. All with security outriders. He finally turned. His eyes had that particular gleam, the gleam of someone who has spent decades watching this particular family from the outside, cataloging details the way other people collect stamps. The last time I saw a pattern like that was before the coronation briefing. I didn't know what to say to that. So I said, right. Okay. My name isn't important to this story. What matters is what I saw. What I heard, rather, first, before I saw anything. A kind of shift in the crowd. The way a flock of birds changes direction all at once without a signal. A murmur that rolled from the gate end toward where we were standing, not loud, not panicked, just alert. The lanyard man was already moving closer to the railings. I followed him. I don't know why. Cold coffee in my hand. Friends still not arrived. The cars had already gone through. Whatever he'd seen, it was over. But the crowd was buzzing with a particular energy, not the excitement of a celebrity sighting, more like the energy of people who had just watched something they didn't fully understand and were turning it over, looking for the right interpretation. A woman beside me, American accent, sensible shoes, was talking quietly into her phone. No, I'm telling you, it's something to do with Kate. I read something this morning, a palace statement, no, not a big announcement, just a line at the bottom of a briefing, something about, yes, that Kate, she drifted away. Her voice dissolved into the general noise of the street. Here is what I knew about Kate Middleton, or rather, the Princess of Wales, because I'd trained myself to use the correct title, which was roughly what most reasonably informed people know. That she had come through something enormous in the last year. The cancer diagnosis. The months of silence that the press had treated like a conspiracy and, which turned out to be a woman doing the quiet, private, non-negotiable work of trying not to die. That she had come back. Not with a statement. Not with a press conference. She came back the way genuinely strong people always come back, incrementally, showing up in small ways before the large ones, so that by the time the world registered that she was back, she had already been back for some time. What I didn't know, what none of us standing outside St. James's that morning knew, was that upstairs, in one of those rooms you never get to see, something had been decided. A decision that had apparently been discussed for months. A decision that required those private play cars and their security outriders. The lanyard man tapped my arm. There, he said. I looked. A single figure, a woman, coat the color of winter sky, moving from a side entrance toward a waiting car with the particular unhurried pace of someone who has been trained not to hurry in public because hurrying implies panic and panic is the one thing you're never, ever allowed to show. She didn't look up. she didn't need to. The crowd knew. You could feel it, that recognition, that collective intake of something that isn't quite breath. The American woman had stopped walking, phone still to her ear, forgotten. The man with the paper map had folded it. The boy in the orange cagoule had stopped listening to his father. For about 4 seconds, maybe 5, the entire pavement ran on a different frequency. Then, the car door closed. The car moved. And London resumed being London. The lanyard man turned to me. "You know what that means," he said. Not a question. "Tell me," I said. Because I was starting to think that he knew something I didn't, and I was right. He looked back at the now empty entrance. "King Charles," he said carefully, "does not expand what he has already assigned. He is not a man who gives twice." He paused. When he gives something new additional, it means he has made a calculation. About trust. About what comes next. Another pause. About who he believes is ready. I stood there with my cold coffee. "And, he's made that calculation about her?" I asked. The lanyard man almost smiled. "He made it months ago," he said. "Today is just the paperwork." My phone buzzed. "My friend, here. Where are you?" I didn't move for another moment. Because there was something about that sentence that lodged in me. Today is just the paperwork, something about the weight behind it, the years behind it, the particular shape of a trust that gets built in the hardest possible way, when the person earning it is fighting for their life and still showing up, still calling, still somehow present in the machinery of something larger than themselves. I thought about what it takes to earn confidence from a king. Not applause. Not popularity. Not headlines. The quiet, grinding, unglamorous, private work. Today is just the paperwork. I turned around and went to find my friend. The thing about royal announcements is that they don't announce themselves. Not the real ones. The ones that matter, the ones that shift the architecture of power in ways that historians will write about 30 years from now, those come wrapped in institutional language so measured, so deliberately undramatic, that you could read right through them and miss the entire point. My friend Marcus had worked as a press attaché for a government ministry for 11 years before he burned out and went to write a blog about it that, inexplicably, had more readers than the ministry itself. He called me that afternoon. "You were outside St. James's this morning," he said. "How do you know that?" "Because you have a specific way of going quiet on your socials when something catches you," he said. "I've known you long enough." I was sitting at my kitchen table. The cold coffee was replaced now with tea. Outside the window, London was dimming, that early evening darkness that arrives in October like an uninvited lodger who stays until March. "Tell me what you know," I said. He made the sound of a man choosing his words from a particular shelf. "What I know," he said, "is what was buried in a palace communication that went out this morning to a very specific list of journalists. Not a press release. Not a briefing. A communication, the kind that gets sent when they want something known without wanting it made into theater. And the title," he said. "She's been given additional custodial responsibility over a patronage portfolio that previously lived directly under the king's personal office. It's procedural language. But procedural language is the only language they use for things they actually mean." I let that settle. That's significant? Marcus level significant, or actual significant? Don't be clever with me today, I'm tired. He exhaled. It means that Charles, not William, not the joint office, Charles himself has transferred a piece of his own formal responsibility into our hands. Not delegated. Transferred. There's a difference that matters enormously in institutional terms and approximately nothing to anyone who's never worked in these structures. Explain it to me like I've never worked in these structures. Delegation means, I trust you to carry this while I'm busy. Transfer means, I believe you are the right person to hold this, full stop. It is a statement of permanent confidence, not temporary convenience. The window had gone fully dark. I'd been trying, since that morning, to locate the feeling I'd had watching that car pull away. Standing there with my cold coffee and my absent friend, watching a woman in a winter sky coat move with the economy of someone who has learned that every public movement is a kind of statement. What had I actually felt? Not excitement. Not the celebrity-adjacent thrill of proximity to someone famous. Something quieter than that. Something closer to recognition, maybe. Recognition of a particular kind of survival. Because here is what I kept coming back to: she had been, by any reasonable measure, through the worst year of her life. The kind of year that reorders your understanding of what you are and what you want and what actually matters. The kind that leaves marks you don't show in public because you've been trained, by birth, by marriage, by a decade of being watched, to not show things in public. And she had come through it with her function intact. No more than intact. Expanded. That is not a small thing. What's the patronage portfolio? I asked Marcus. Cultural and charitable work, primarily. Heritage preservation. A cluster of mental health charities she'd already been involved with informally. Children's welfare organizations. He paused. All things she'd already been doing, essentially. But now with the formal weight of the crown behind them. Which means resources. Access. The ability to move things. She was already doing the work. Yes. And now she has the title to match. That's exactly it, Marcus said. And that's the part that gets missed in how people talk about titles. They talk about them like they're rewards. Like being given a gold star. But, in this family, in this institution, a formal title isn't a reward. It's a tool. It comes with obligations and capacity in equal measure. He stopped. Charles didn't give her a title because she earned it. He gave her a title because he needs her to use it. That is a completely different thing. I sat with that. He needs her. The monarchy needs her, Marcus said carefully. Charles understands better than any of them, maybe, because of what he waded through, because of the decades he spent watching his mother carry the whole weight of the institution on her own. He understands that it cannot be one person. It has never been able to be one person. The continuity of the thing depends on distribution. On the next generation being genuinely capable. And he thinks she is. He has decided she is, Marcus said. Which, given this particular man's particular caution, is not the same thing as thinking. I want to tell you about something Marcus said near the end of that call. We'd been talking for almost an hour. The tea had gone cold. I was sitting in the dark because I'd forgotten to turn a lamp on. He said, I covered the period after Diana. I was very young, just a junior staffer, but I remember the mood. The way the institution looked at itself. The way the public looked at it. There was a brittleness. He paused. What I see now is not the opposite of that, exactly. But something that has grown up past it. Something that has been tested and still exists. Do you think she knows how much rests on her? I asked. Long pause. I think, Marcus said, that she has known that for a very long time. I think she knew it from the beginning, actually, just didn't know how she'd feel about it. And then, the year she's had, the kind of year that strips everything down to what's actually true, I think she came through it, and the answer to how she feels about it is at peace. Not resigned. Not martyred. Just clear. The lamp. I finally turned on the lamp. That's a lot of weight, I said. Yes, he said. And she's carrying it upright. That evening I went looking for the palace communication Marcus had mentioned. It took me 40 minutes of reading through layers of institutional language, the deliberately beige prose of people who have been trained to communicate everything and reveal nothing, before I found it. Buried in a section about operational restructuring. 2 sentences, really. Dressed in the vocabulary of administrative process. But, if you knew what you were looking at, and now I did, those 2 sentences were doing an enormous amount of work. They were saying, we trust her. They were saying, this is not temporary. They were saying, she is part of the foundation now, not the decoration. I sat back in my chair. Outside, London made its London sounds, a siren somewhere, a bus, someone's laughter coming through a window above the street. I thought about the woman in the winter sky coat. The particular steadiness of how she moved. The crowd on the pavement, going quiet without being asked. The American woman on the phone. The man with the paper map. All of us, for 4 or 5 seconds, running on a different frequency. My neighbor B is 73 years old and has lived in the same flat on our street since 1987. She watched the wedding. The first one, Charles and Diana. She stood outside on the pavement with a Union Jack flag and a friend who has since moved to Portugal and 3 glasses of something fizzy she won't admit was champagne. She has photographs from that day in a biscuit tin she keeps on the shelf above her television, and she has never once, in the years I've known her, spoken about that family without a particular mixture of affection and wariness, the way you might speak about a relative who has disappointed you many times and whom you love in spite of that, or because of it. I knocked on her door the day after. This is something I do, when I've been rattling around inside a thing and can't find the outside edge of it. I go and talk to B, who has no patience for abstraction and a specific gift for saying exactly the thing that cuts to the center. She made us both proper tea, in actual cups, not mugs, on an actual saucer, and I told her what I'd seen. What Marcus had told me. The communication buried in the palace briefing. The transferred portfolio. The 2 sentences dressed up as nothing. She listened without interrupting, which is unusual for her. When I finished, she looked at her tea for a moment. Then, she said, she's not like the others. I waited. The ones before her, the ones who came into that family from outside, they either disappeared into it or they broke against it. Like a tide coming in. She set her cup down with a small, definitive click. She didn't do either. And that, she said, takes something that you cannot teach and cannot pretend to have. What does it take? I asked. B looked at me with the expression of someone who finds the question slightly obvious. Knowing who you are, she said. Before they tell you who you're supposed to be. I kept thinking about that. The days after. I do a lot of walking in London. It's the only city I know where walking is genuinely its own activity, not just transportation, and I spent a lot of those days walking and turning it over. Knowing who you are before they tell you who you're supposed to be. Because the thing about that family, the institution, the machinery of it is that it has a very particular appetite for identity. It absorbs people. Swallows them whole sometimes, gently, the way large things swallow small things without meaning any harm. The protocol. The titles. The cameras that are there before you've finished becoming the person you're going to be. I'd read some of her history. The years before William. The years after. The particular gauntlet of public life that she'd walked before and after the wedding, and the grace, that's the only word, even if it sounds slightly old-fashioned, with which she had navigated things that would have made most people run for a quiet life in a county with no cameras and a good pub. She hadn't run. She had shown up. Consistently, quietly, in the way that only matters if you actually care about the showing up rather than the being seen to show up. Which are 2 completely different things, and the public, if you give them enough time, can always tell which one is happening. There's a woman I know, I'll call her Frances, who works in a charitable foundation that had, over the years, been involved in several of the patronages now moving under the princess's formal umbrella. I had coffee with her the week after. Frances is one of those people who talks with great precision. Each word chosen like she's packing a bag for a long trip and every item has to earn its weight. She'd been doing this work for 15 years. She'd seen patronages come and go, names lent to causes and, then, quietly withdrawn when the names needed their privacy back. What does a patronage actually mean, I asked her, when it's this formal? When it has this kind of institutional weight behind it? She wrapped her hands around her cup. Resources, she said. Which you know. But, beyond resources, access. The right letter. The right call returned. In our sector, that is the difference between a program that exists on paper and a program that actually reaches people. She paused. But, more than that. When a name of that magnitude attaches formally to a cause, not as a celebrity endorsement, but, as a genuine custodial role, it signals to every other institution, every other potential supporter, that this is serious. This is going to be here in 5 years. In 10 years. Another pause. People give to permanence. And, this feels permanent to you? Frances looked at me steadily. Charles is not a well man, she said, not cruelly, just plainly. He knows that the work of the crown cannot rest on his shoulders alone. What he's doing, what this represents, is building the next structure. Deliberately. Deliberately choosing who carries what, and why. She looked out the cafe window at the street. He's chosen her to carry this. That's not sentiment. That's architecture. I want to tell you what I think, and I want to be honest about the fact that it is only what I think, not what I know, not what I can prove, not what any palace sources told me directly. What I think is this: the last year, the illness, the treatment, the silence, the return was not a detour in her story. It is the center of it. Because here is what getting very sick does: if you are lucky enough and strong enough and surrounded by the right people to come through it, it burns away the performance of things. The scaffolding. The version of yourself that exists for other people's comfort. It leaves you with just the actual material, what you are made of, stripped to the load-bearing parts. And, what she apparently found, in that stripping, was that she still wanted this. Not the title. Not the position. Not the cameras or the waving or the being watched at all times. The work. The Francis-level work. The actual reaching people work. The unglamorous, behind the scenes, making the right call get returned work. She came through the worst year of her life and found she still wanted to show up. That is not something a title gives you. That is something you either have or you don't. And Charles, who has waited longer than most human beings wait for anything, who has watched this institution from the inside for 7 decades, who has buried his mother and inherited the whole weight of a living history, Charles had been watching her. Not the performance of her. Not the headlines or the photographs or the public version. The actual, underneath it all, load-bearing version. And, he had decided, yes. B had one more thing to say, the day I knocked on her door. As I was leaving. She said it the way she says things that she doesn't want to make into a big thing, quickly, facing away, already gathering my empty cup to take to the kitchen. The ones who last, she said, are the ones who make themselves useful. Not visible. Useful. She was in the kitchen before I could respond. I stood in her hallway for a moment. The biscuit tin on the shelf. The photographs inside it. A pavement in 1981 and a flag and 3 glasses of something fizzy that definitely wasn't champagne. The distance between that morning and this one. And how much had been quietly, stubbornly, incrementally built in the space between. There is a courtyard at the back of a building I have no legitimate reason to be in, a contact of a contact, a favor extended through 2 intermediaries that you could stand in and hear, on a quiet morning, absolutely nothing. Not the traffic. Not the tourists. Not the sirens. Nothing. I stood there on a Friday morning, about 3 weeks after the St. James's morning, after Marcus's phone call, after tea with Francis and tea with B and all the walking I'd done through London turning this over in my hands. The person I was meeting, a man I will call only Thomas, because he asked me to, and because he still works in proximity to these things and has a mortgage and 2 children in secondary school, came into the courtyard with 2 coffees in paper cups and the particular look of a man deciding, in real time, how much he is going to say. He handed me a coffee. I thanked him. We stood. Thomas had been, at various points in his career, adjacent to the workings of royal patronage in ways that are both too specific to describe and too vague to be useful in a court of law. He had watched things from the right angle, for long enough, with the right kind of quiet attention. Tell me, I said, what this actually means. Not the procedural language. Not the institutional framing. The human version. He drank his coffee. The human version, he said, is that a man who has been watching someone carefully, for years, through good seasons and terrible ones, has decided that his judgment about that person was correct. He looked at the courtyard wall. And, that is, I don't know if you appreciate how rare that is, in these structures. How rare it is for someone at the top of an institution like this to say, formally, through action rather than words, "I was right about you." He's been watching her that long? He's been watching everyone that long, Thomas said. It's in his nature. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean, and he doesn't give things he doesn't intend to give. Which makes everyone around him slightly nervous, most of the time. He almost smiled. But it also means that when he does move, when he does transfer something, formalize something, it means something actual. I asked the question that had been sitting in me for 3 weeks. What does he see in her that he's decided to trust? Thomas turned to look at me properly for the first time. Continuity, he said. Not popularity. They've had popular ones who didn't last, or who broke, or who left, or who turned the attention into something for themselves. Not charisma, the same problem. He paused. What he sees in her is someone who understands what the thing is. The actual purpose of it. Not the theater of it. The purpose. He looked back at the wall. She came through this last year and the purpose was still there. That's what he's betting on. 3 weeks of thinking about this had left me with something I was struggling to articulate. It was something about survival. About what it means to survive something, not just physically, though that, but to come through it and find that the essential thing, the thing you built yourself around, is still intact. Still standing. Not because it was defended or protected or kept behind glass, but because it was real enough to survive without scaffolding. My mother had a phrase she used, when I was growing up, for the people she admired most. She would say, "She's solid all the way through." Not brilliant. Not dazzling. Not impressive in the way that makes people applaud. Solid. Meaning, what you see is what is there, and what is there holds underweight. I had thought about that phrase a lot in the last 3 weeks. Thomas finished his coffee. He was quiet for a moment. Then, he said something I wasn't expecting. I've been doing this long enough to have watched a generation grow up in these roles. Children who were photographed on palace steps become adults who carry formal responsibilities. And there's a thing that happens, not always, but sometimes, with the ones who are genuinely built for it, a moment where the institution and the person stop pulling against each other. He turned the empty cup in his hands. She's arrived at that moment, he said. That's what you're actually seeing, in the communication, in the transfer, in all of it. You're seeing the end of a long negotiation between who she is and what she's required to be. He stopped. She won the negotiation. I stood in the courtyard and felt the quiet of it, the strange sealed-off quiet that had nothing to do with soundproofing and everything to do with the particular density of history in some London spaces, the way certain buildings hold the weight of what's happened inside them. Did she know she was negotiating? I asked. Thomas looked at me for a long moment. I think she knew from day one, he said. I think that was part of what made it so hard, early on. Knowing exactly what was being asked, knowing it was a permanent ask, and having to decide genuinely, not as a performance, whether to say yes. And she said yes. She keeps saying yes, he said. That's the thing about her. It's not one decision. It's thousands of small ones. Every morning, every engagement, every time the cameras are there, and the cameras are always there, she says yes again. He paused. Charles sees that. He's been counting the yes. This is him saying, I've counted. I walked back through London that morning. Past the tourists on the mall, past the cyclists who refuse to respect any traffic law that's ever existed, past a coffee cart and a woman arguing into her phone and a group of schoolchildren in matching high-visibility vests who were being herded with the particular weary patience of teachers who have done this trip many times before. Past all of it. London is a city that has forgotten more history than most cities ever accumulate. Every cobblestone has been under different feet. Every building has been something else. The whole city is layers of what it was and what it is and what it's in the process of becoming, all of it existing simultaneously, all of it pressing against the present. She was somewhere in that city. Not performing. Not posing. Working. Francis level working. Making the right calls get returned. Building the structures that will reach people who need reaching, quietly, without a camera, without the part that anyone writes about. And, somewhere in a room in a palace whose precise location I don't know, a man who had waited a very long time to be where he is was sitting with the particular satisfaction. I imagine it as a quiet satisfaction, a private one, not one that gets announced, of a person who had made a judgment about a human being and been proven right. I was right about you. There are not many things, in the end, that matter more than that. Being seen clearly. Being trusted correctly. Having someone in a position of authority look at everything you are, the resilience and the struggle and the thousand quiet yes, and say, yes. You. This. Here. He texted me that evening. She doesn't usually text. She thinks texting is a young person's shorthand for things worth saying properly. She has said this to me while texting. She does not acknowledge the irony. The text said, "Did you ever write that thing down?" I typed back, still writing it. She replied, after a pause long enough that she was clearly composing rather than reacting, "Good. Some things should be written down before they get ordinary. Before people forget they were once remarkable." I put my phone down. Outside, London was doing its London thing, the sounds of it, the irreducible rumbling aliveness of a city that doesn't stop, that has never stopped, that carries its history under its feet and keeps moving. Tomorrow, she would say yes again. Thousands of small decisions. Every one of them adding up. Every one of them counted.